This Declaration of Independence.
Welcome to another episode on Geopolitics with Alex. First of all, apologies. You might notice that I have lost my voice, or at least about to lose my voice. And the reason is that today's episode is going to focus on the World Economic Forum in Davos, where I spent 4 to 5 days probably talking too much and being too much outside in the cold. But let's give it a try. And the way in which I'll do it is I'll give you an introduction, and then I'll give you my 5 takeaways from Davos, and then a conclusion. So by way of introduction, for me, this was the 8th or 9th World Economic Forum. I've been there in Davos, 3rd week of January, as it always is, or often is, in different capacities as minister and as vice president of the European Investment Bank, and now as a professor. And I thoroughly enjoy it. It's one of those things probably where people who don't have an invitation or haven't been there, they're quite quick to criticize it because it feels like a closed shop, which I don't think it is. And people who are there think that, wow, this is the greatest thing ever. This was actually the 53rd World Economic Forum in Davos, and credit to the place. Basically what it does, it brings together, and I'll give you the numbers in a second, top politicians, businessmen, NGOs, civil society, journalists, academics like myself. They are old people, young people, and everything in between. Now, for me, as I said, I was there from Sunday to Thursday. And during that time, I participated in 12 panels, either as a speaker or just listening in. I had 14 separate bilateral meetings. I gave 13 interviews to international media. I went to 2 dinners. I'm not an evening person, so I tried to avoid those, but they were fun. And then, of course, I had a lot of bump-ins. So basically, you see a lot of old and current colleagues in the corridors and just stop to chat for a little while. If you want the average hours of sleep, it was 6. And I did go to the gym 3 times. But the gym is not the reason I'm losing my voice. So here we go, my 5 takeaways. First one is just to give you the numbers, because, you know, Davos quite often feels quite sort of mystical to people. So basically, the theme of this year was cooperation in a fragmented world, which of course is a good theme to be discussing from all types of different angles. You had roughly 2,700 participants in the Congress Center itself. Then of course there are a lot of marginal events outside. You had people from 130 countries, and remember there are about 200 countries in the world. You had 50 heads of state and government, roughly speaking, and about 300 ministers from different countries. You had 50 representatives of civil society and NGOs, that is organizations, in the Congress Center, in the margins much more. You had about 600 CEOs from different types of companies. And then you had 160 change makers, which usually are young global leaders or movers and shakers. And all in all, Davos had about 500 different sessions. And you know, they range from a whole bunch of different topics, from energy, food crisis, to the economy, to industry headwinds, to social vulnerabilities, to geopolitical risks, etc., etc. And the way in which I see it, I go there because it sort of gives me the pulse of the year, you know, what's cooking at the moment. And the themes vary, you know, sometimes you have a superstar, President Xi Jinping coming in 2017, or you know, you have the Prime Minister of India, Modi, coming in at another year. Sometimes it's about climate change, sometimes it's about the euro crisis, financial crisis, sometimes it's about the asylum crisis, it could be about Brexit, could be about, you know, COVID. So the themes vary, of course, depending on the year. So basic facts and numbers, in my mind, are quite impressive. My second takeaway from Davos is of course linked to my book, and a lot of the panels I participated in were about this, so geopolitics. So I think there was very much a sentiment that we are witnessing an end of an era, so the end of the post-Cold War era, and something new is emerging, but there wasn't consensus of, what it is. We talked a lot about the theme of my book, actually, the age of disorder. There was clearly a tension between the West and the rest. I was in a lot of panels, both closed and open, where there was clearly sort of all the Westerners talking about the war in Ukraine and so on and so forth, whereas the rest of the world was saying, well, yeah, it's very important, but we should also be looking at the multilateral order and climate change and many other things. In my mind, and I draw from the debate there that you could be at the moment looking at a number of power centers, for specific, but then much more broadly. So you have China, the United States, the European Union, and India, and I'll get back to India in a little bit. But on top of that, of course, you have power centers in the Middle East and the Gulf region. You have them in Africa and the African Union. You have them in Latin America and many other places as well. But what was really significant to see that there were no Russians there, right? A lot of Ukrainians, get back to that in a second. But my thinking is that the power center game, if you have two extremes, you have the United States and China, they are, systemic rivals and competitors. And then you have the European Union, which is very close to the United States, but it will use its strategic autonomy to play with China as well. But then the big player, the mediator here is going to be India. And the way in which I see it is actually India is going to do a lot of cooperation with Europe. So watch out for that in the future. Because of course China likes a multipolar world, doesn't like unipolarity, except in Asia. China wants to have a unipolar Asia where it's in the lead, and India of course would disagree with this. I also took out of the geopolitical debate that, if you look at it geographically, and I'm simplifying, you have the East versus the West tension. That's the US and China. But then you also have North versus the South. So East versus the West, in my mind, is sort of geostrategic tension, right? Whereas North versus South is probably more about the economy and sort of agency in the economy and how we get that system working. And one of the things I took out of there from the debate was that, when we talk about the global order and the fact that the global South wants skin in the game, it wants to be involved, is it about agency or is it about empathy? I actually think it's about both. So the West needs to understand that the global South wants to be involved and represented, but at the same time, the West needs empathy in the sense that it needs to show what I call dignified foreign policy. So this was my sort of geopolitical take, that a lot of tensions, a lot of movements going on at the moment. The second big theme and my third takeaway from Davos is Ukraine. And as I mentioned, there were no Russians there this time around, as there were not in May either. But the First Lady, Mrs. Zelenska, was there. President Zelensky spoke through video conference, and then in personal presence we also had the Vice Premier of Ukraine and actually the Klitschko brothers. Now, the big takeaways that I have from there, and sorry to sound a little bit belligerent, but I'm trying to reflect the mood. The mood was that no one knows when the war is going to end, but there will have to be a negotiated peace, if you will. But the message was, it all depends on the battlefield. So, the quote, and I'm not giving this to anyone, was, if you want peace tomorrow, you must deliver weapons today. This was the basic message. And I know it sounds brutal, it sounds paradoxical, but basically we've gone beyond, as we've discussed in this series many times, the point of no return. There was also a lot of talk about Germany and the Leopard's tanks. What's going to happen with this? There was quite strong criticism of Germany. And remember, in this series we've talked about the German Zeitenwende, which has become a bit of a Zeitenslalom, and it's trying to sort of change its tack. Of course, after Davos, we had the NATO meeting in Ramstein, where there was no solution on sending tanks yet, and also the Franco-German summit, same thing, no solution yet. But I guess the basic message on Ukraine was that Russia won't give up, and the war and the conflict will be protracted. But there was also a sentiment in many of the geopolitical discussions I was involved in that the global south was basically saying that, listen, there are other things in this world happening than just the crisis in Ukraine, and keep that in mind. So Ukraine was certainly a theme, but probably not as heavy as it was in Davos in May. The fourth takeaway I had was on the economy. And here I would argue that there was a lot of talk about the geopolitical tensions and what kind of an impact it has on the economy. And of course there was discussions about the energy and the food crisis, which are a direct domino effect or follow-up of the war in Ukraine. And again, it's a war which is regional, but it has global implications. There was a lot of talk about high inflation combined with high interest rates, low growth, and high debt. But still, I would argue, and having listened to the managing director of the IMF and also to the president of the European Central Bank, that the mood on the economy was not as deflated or as recessionary as I expected. I'm not an expert in the field, and I go with the numbers that exist, and there I would argue that many of the economists were worried, but they were not talking that much about a global recession. I mean, it was there, but it wasn't like the main theme. There was a lot of talk about industrial headwinds in different sectors because of disruptions in value chains, and also about social vulnerabilities. So economy was very much a theme that was discussed. And then finally, and my fifth takeaway before I conclude, is technology. And as you'll know, technology is always in the forefront because it is really an instrument of change. Interesting enough, I don't remember when it was, perhaps 2017 or 2016, when, or even earlier, when Klaus Schwab published a book called The Fourth Industrial Revolution. I remember reading it before going to Davos, and for me it was a bit of a wake-up call to everything that's linked to artificial intelligence and robotization. And my argument has been, and still is, that the technological revolution, or the fourth industrial revolution, whatever you want to call it, it will change three things. It changes the economy and the way in which we work, it changes politics and the way in which we communicate, and it does change science and the way in which we are as human beings. So therefore, it's something which is one of the major megatrends that we have to cope with all the time, and I think every country shares this challenge. Now, there was a lot of talk about metaverse, but more like as a space for having meetings. I'm myself a little bit skeptical and a little bit worried, and call me old-fashioned, about the metaverse of creating sort of alternative realities, but it was part of the program. If we look at the world by and large, of course, now we have, roughly speaking, from some sources, 30 billion connected devices. And that, of course, means that you can not only look at the upsides of technology, how it brings us together, but also the downsides. In other words, cybersecurity, data protection, and privacy. So those were very much themes that were discussed. By the way, I also heard that there are about 3 billion gamers around the world. I'm not a gamer myself. I belong to the old Pac-Man generation. But that was an interesting stat, at least for me to learn. And the sentiment was very much that we need to use artificial intelligence for the good of humanity, not the bad of humanity. I had a lot of interesting meetings with different tech entrepreneurs. So, by way of a conclusion then, what made me an optimist, what made me a pessimist, and what was the key country? So, on the optimist side, I was surprised that even in economic difficulty, there was optimism about a way out of the current impasse and perhaps not diving into a deep recession. There was also optimism about solving the climate crisis and the different solutions that exist. And there was optimism in finding alternative energy solutions. And I'm not only talking about Europe actually detaching itself from the dependency on Russian fossil fuels, but in general, many different innovations. What made me pessimistic? Well, I think the geopolitical debate was still too complicated for me to draw a conclusion that we will find a new world order. So I was quite pessimistic about that. I wasn't too excited either about the debate that we had on Ukraine, for the reason that it is a tragedy, it is a war, and people are dying. And the reason I'm pessimistic is that we're not, seeing the end of the light of the end of the tunnel. And I was also very pessimistic about the trade debate, because there is this sort of wind of protectionism. We saw the United States with its IRA measures and then European Union countering it. I'm all for creating avenues for green growth, but I'm not sure that subsidies are the right way to go about it. I believe more in the internal market of the European Union, the four freedoms. I believe in competition policy, in other words, antitrust, and then I also believe in free trade. What then was the key country? Well, I would argue that the sort of, the superstar in town this year was India. You could see India pretty much everywhere. Sometimes it can be China everywhere. This time I think the delegation was somewhere between 40 and 60 around the vice premier of China. A lot of criticism about zero COVID policy, etc., but a little bit hoping about opening up. But India was there everywhere. Big delegation, actually from what I heard 4 times bigger than the French delegation, plus of course a lot of Indian companies. Why? Well, because India is an up-and-coming power, of course, very much in the face of developing and growing. But one of the big milestones that we'll get this year is that India will become actually the most populated country in the world. It'll surpass, according to some estimates, it'll surpass China in the month of April. So, reasons to be optimistic, reasons to be pessimistic, and then the key country to watch is China. So my takeaway from Davos, in summary, is to say that it still has a very strong place in the international and public discourse, because it brings so many different players from so many different places to have a conversation about the future and how to solve problems. And I really like that about Davos. Secondly, the focus was on geopolitics, and especially the West and the rest. Thirdly, the focus was on Ukraine, where there wasn't much hope for the conflict to be ended. Fourth, there was discussion about the economy, probably a little bit more optimistic and positive than I expected. And 5, as always, we talked about technology. So these are my simple takeaways from a very complicated but super interesting week in Davos. I hope that you keep the comments coming in. More than happy to read them and try to answer a few questions. And just a little reminder that we've started a new series. It's called Governance This Week. And in that, Roland Skoltabers, our head of communication, will be interviewing 1 or 2 guests about current affairs, current events every week. Thank you very much for listening.
America made its Declaration of Independence to the world.